Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my final fight analyzation and my final fight review of the excellent boxing contest between that of a Saul Canelo Alvarez and a Terence Bud Crawford. And of course, for those of you that did not end up hearing about the result, Terence Bud Crawford ended up pulling off the upset victory, not only overall according to me because I had predicted Canelo Alvarez to just win this fight, and I thought that Canelo Alvarez would be not only a little bit too big, but combined with his skill set, I thought that he would just be a little bit too much for that of a Terence Bud Crawford. But as I said, kind of heading into this fight, especially after Canelo Alvarez's most recent performance over that of a William Skull, I would have not been surprised had this fight, could have went either way. And what I will personally state is this: although I do think that Crawford did deserve this fight, I don't think that it was quite as far apart as what the commentary crew was stating. I think that it was a close fight that probably was around 7 rounds to 5. I don't think that the commentary crew was giving Canelo Alvarez a whole lot of credit with some of the shots that he was landing. But either way, overall, let me congratulate Terence Bud Crawford, quite a bit because now, in terms overall of this victory over Canelo Alvarez, you certainly have to debate that Terence Bud Crawford, that he probably is the number one pound for pound fighter once again within the sport of boxing, that it more than likely is undisputed. Of course, unless you were maybe to debate Alexander Usyk, but with what Terence Bud Crawford just did, he probably is going to have to be debated as not only the undisputed best fighter in the world today, but also the best fighter of his era. He's undefeated. He's someone that I believe now is 42-0. He defeated, I'm not going to say every opponent that everyone called for, but he defeated pretty much all the people that everyone needed him to fight. Or at least, he fought some of the guys that, overall were more dangerous. His resume, of course, is not the most extensive within that of boxing history. He doesn't have quite the resume of certain guys like that of a Sugar Ray Leonard or like that, say of a Manny Pacquiao or a Floyd Mayweather. But as I stated after this victory over that of a Canelo Alvarez, he is going to have to be put in the same room and the same realm as certain guys like a Sugar Ray Leonard, same guys like that of a Roberto Duran, and certain guys like that of a Floyd Mayweather, and certain guys like that. And to be quite honest with you, you could debate that Terence Bud Crawford could be the greatest fighter of all time. You could debatably say that. Because Crawford, of course, pretty much ran through that of Errol Spence Jr. He ended up beating Sean Porter. He beat Victor Postol. I don't know if I would ever quite debate that he would be over Floyd Mayweather or something like that in my personal view. But he, at the very least, is going to be top 10 of all time. No doubt about it. At least, for fighters within that of the past 70 years. And I have to put Terence Bud Crawford, just in my personal view, even over certain fighters like that of a Sugar Ray Leonard and even over certain guys like that of a Roberto Duran. And the reason why I have to do that is because those fighters ended up losing certain fights that they probably should have not lost. Like when Sugar Ray Leonard ended up losing to that of Duran when he first moved up in weight, 2 separate weight classes. And of course, I believe that Roberto Duran, he lost a couple of other fights that obviously he didn't probably belong at that weight, but they were winnable, and he ended up losing those fights, like to Wilfredo Benitez, in my view, and a couple of those other guys. So Terence Bud Crawford, he is going to have to be, overall at the top of the boxing tree when we talk about some of the greatest fighters of all time. Once again, is his resume quite as extensive as a Manny Pacquiao or a Floyd Mayweather or a Sugar Ray Leonard? Not quite, but in terms of his era, and I believe that Max Kellerman stated this after the fight, that Terence Bud Crawford, in terms of his era, there's no fighter that overall more than likely would have beat him. And when we take a look at a lot of fighters within the history of the game, there's not a lot of fighters, if any fighter, that after this fight you can really claim would have been 100% favored over that of a Terence Bud Crawford. Now, that being stated overall, let's talk about Mr. Canelo Alvarez. Why do I believe that he ended up losing the fight? I stated that there was a possibility that either fighter could maybe look like a dud in this fight. I don't really think that either fighter looked like a dud in this fight. I just think that Canelo Alvarez, that he was having a big problem with Terence Bud Crawford's reach, and I think overall that Crawford was a lot bigger and able to handle the weight a lot better than what most people, including myself, really had expected. I thought that Canelo Alvarez would more than likely be able to get within Crawford's range, but Canelo Alvarez, even from the very early bell, he was just backing up a little bit too much. And even then, he still at times was, I'm not going to say completely outboxing Crawford, but there were certain times where I thought he got the better of Crawford in certain rounds, but it wasn't clear enough in my personal view, to where he obviously beat that of a Crawford. And of course, Canelo Alvarez was the guy that obviously was adjusted to this weight class, and the guy that also was looked at as astronomically skilled. And even as you can tell within this fight, he is someone that is astronomically skilled. But after this fight, Canelo Alvarez is someone that can never be remembered on the level of a Sugar Ray Leonard. He can never be remembered on the level of certain guys like a Roberto Duran. He can never be remembered on the certain level of those guys. He can't be remembered on that level. And the reason why is because not only did you lose to Floyd Mayweather Jr. when you were 23 years old, not only did you lose to Dimitri Bivol when you ended up losing, moving up to light heavyweight, but you also ended up losing to the second guy in your career, where that guy overall ended up moving a couple of weight classes up. And then on top of that, he ended up beating you. And in most people's eyes, quite clearly. I don't think, in my view, that it was quite as clear as what some other people overall were trying to state. I do agree with two of the judges that it was 7 rounds to 5. But that being stated, overall, Terence Bud Crawford, he just did a little bit more. He was a little bit too accurate. And on top of that, he just threw a little bit too much. And Canelo Alvarez, it was very obvious that, if he wasn't feeling Crawford's power, I mean, the power, I think, was affecting Canelo to a degree. But I think that what really was more affecting Canelo Alvarez, in my personal view, was that lead hand by that of a Terence Bud Crawford. I do think that he felt the power, but I don't necessarily think that, it was ever to the point to where Canelo Alvarez was going to get knocked out. But there was moments, of course, where Canelo Alvarez was tired. And I did bring up the possibility that since Terence Bud Crawford is a lighter target and he is someone that is more maneuverable on top of his boxing IQ, and on top of that, he's someone that, is a lighter target than what Canelo has been used to fighting in several years. Sometimes that can actually create a little bit of a disadvantage when you finally fight a fighter that is more maneuverable and that's smart, and on top of that, that hard to hit at certain times compared to guys like Edgar Berlanga or compared to guys like that of a Jaime Munguia. It can be a little bit harder to hit those type of fighters. And in no way am I creating an excuse for a Canelo Alvarez, but I think overall that Crawford was a bit faster, and I think that, that jab was a bit more effective than what he was possibly expecting. So, I mean, it just is what it is. But congratulations to Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. I thought that he did a lot of things correct within this fight. He did get hit, with some flush punches in this fight. But that being stated, overall, he definitely put on a good enough defensive performance, in my personal view, in order to clearly, possibly just pull out the fight, or in order to just win this fight. So, Terence Bud Crawford, once again, congratulations to the man. I think, once again, excuse me, in my personal view, that you have to debate him with any fighter that we've ever seen. Now, I don't think that I would quite debate him on the same level as guys like a Floyd Mayweather, just in my view, because Floyd is probably the most complete fighter that I've ever seen. And Terence Bud Crawford, in my view, is probably about, just a little bit below that in terms of all-around skill. But, I mean, that would have been an amazing fight to see, between that of a Crawford and a Floyd Mayweather. That would have been an amazing, amazing fight to see, because Crawford would have been, I think, a little bit bigger than that of a Floyd. He would have been someone that also had an extraordinarily level boxing IQ, and he would have been someone that had also one-shot knockout power, and someone overall that would have been extremely, extremely dangerous at every turn. That would have been a very interesting fight, and I'm not quite sure if Floyd had ever really fought an all-around boxer like that of a Terence Bud Crawford really throughout his career. Of course, I would claim Canelo Alvarez, but first of all, not only would I state that Canelo was not quite at his peak yet, but then on top of that, Terence Bud Crawford just proved that he was a better boxer compared to that of a Canelo Alvarez. Once again, I think that this probably was debatably, other than the, maybe the Madrimov fight, I think that you can debate that this was probably the most competitive fight in Crawford's career. But that being stated, Crawford, in my view, got the well-deserved victory. Canelo, in my view, just did not do enough. It was very obvious that he was kind of used to targets staying up against ropes a little bit too often. And on top of that, and this is also a weakness that I mentioned with Canelo Alvarez as well, he just admires his own work a little bit too much, in my personal view, especially after throwing shots. And like I said, Canelo, in my view, was going to have to do a little bit more than that in order to win this fight. He was going to have to mix it up. And I think that, excuse me, that Canelo Alvarez, in my personal view, did an okay job of mixing it up within this fight. But he needed to do more than just an okay job. He needed to do an exceptional level job, especially against that of Terence Bud Crawford. And there would be times to where it was obvious that Canelo knew that that lead hand was going to be a problem, and he felt that there was really no true way inside to get inside Terence Bud Crawford's range. So, I mean, it just is what it is. So, Canelo Alvarez, pretty much stood there and, he just kind of let Terence Bud Crawford get off on him a little bit more than what he actually needed to. Now, Canelo still moved in and outside of the range decently, okay? He still avoided a decent amount of shots like what he regularly does. But the point overall is that he just let Crawford, in my personal view, excuse me, he just let overall Terence Bud Crawford kind of throw a little bit too much within his range. And then on top of that, Canelo Alvarez, when he was trying to wear down Terence Bud Crawford a little bit more, overall he was a little bit more tired because he was not used to hitting a type of target that had been that maneuverable for many, many years. So overall, I wasn't necessarily surprised when I seen that out of Canelo Alvarez. But in my view, Canelo Alvarez, he needed to get in and outside of the range a little bit more and then put a little bit more pressure on Crawford. In my personal view, one of the faults that I did state about Canelo Alvarez that may possibly show up in this fight, although I thought that he was going to be better than that, I thought that Canelo Alvarez was going to try to get past the lead hand a little bit better. And basically what I mean by that is that although Canelo Alvarez at times he can be stopped by a lead hand, Canelo Alvarez at times will find ways around it. And I think that Canelo Alvarez, that he did not have enough confidence in his foot speed compared to a Crawford. And I also believe overall that, Crawford's reach did give him a little bit of problems. But that being stated, Canelo just needed to do a little bit more against that of a Terence Bud Crawford. And he still did decently okay. But this fight was mainly fought within that of the mid-range. And Canelo Alvarez is more than likely, and, not more than likely, but obviously as we've seen tonight, he's not going to beat a Terence Bud Crawford in the mid-range. He still did decently okay, especially compared overall to a lot of other fighters that have fought him. But dude, the guy is pretty much better in the mid-range than you. He has better and quicker feet. He's a guy overall, once again, that is very quick. He's also a guy that has a reach advantage over you. So I think Canelo Alvarez just, kind of let Terence Bud Crawford off the hook a little bit too much. But, we could talk about all the adjustments that maybe Canelo Alvarez could try to make all the live long damn day. But the point is that Canelo was not able to do it. And the reason why he was not able to do it is because Terence Bud Crawford is an all-time great level fighter, and Canelo Alvarez is too. But Canelo Alvarez is someone that is not on the same level as Terence Bud Crawford after taking a look at this fight. And he had a phenomenal, phenomenal level performance, or at least, especially compared to the standards, of moving up a couple of weight classes. And let me not also forget, Terence Bud Crawford is now a 3 times undisputed champion. And he's someone, of course, that is the first time, anyone has ever done that in boxing history, at least in 3 separate weight classes. So let me give Terence Bud Crawford a lot of props in order to do that once again. Now, after this win over Canelo Alvarez, he wasn't knocked down once in the fight. There wasn't really ever once in the fight where I ever thought that Terence Bud Crawford looked massively hurt within this fight. Maybe a couple of moments where, he was a little bit hurt, but never majorly hurt within this fight. So you got to give Terence Bud Crawford a lot of props within this fight. And I stated that if Terence Bud Crawford was going to win this fight, that more than likely it was going to look very similar to that of a Sugar Ray Leonard versus a Marvin Hagler, which is pretty much exactly what this fight had looked like. With Crawford at times getting off certain bursts and also getting off that lead hand, and then Canelo Alvarez trying to catch up to, Terence Bud Crawford. But of course, him missing certain shots, and on top of that, just not being able to get off enough shots in order to win the fight. So it just is what it is. But congratulations to Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. He now proved himself to be within that same realm as guys like Sugar Ray Leonard, and Roy Jones and certain guys like that. And to be quite honest with you, he probably has to be above those guys now because, he never ended up suffering a loss in his career. He does not quite have the resume of those fighters in my personal view, but all that pretty much is going to be forgiven after this victory that he just got over a solo Canelo Alvarez. So congratulations to Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. A great congratulations. And of course, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people excited over here. And on top of that, they're probably going to throw, a very, very big party for that of a Terence Bud Crawford. Of course, very, very well deserved because he just accomplished something that pretty much no one else was able to do within the history of boxing. Of course, there's been other boxers that have moved up multiple weight classes and beat somebody before, even if they were an A+ level fighter. But there was no one that was able to do that. And then on top of that, adjust so slightly to that of 154 and then move up 2 other weight divisions. Although Canelo, I've already stated, he's really more of a middleweight. But the point overall is that Crawford is still someone that adjusted to the weight extremely well. I do think that, the year layoff, that it actually did help him a little bit with the weight. And I thought that it could kind of go either way. I do think that Crawford looked slower, and I thought that he looked even more tired compared to his usual standards. But Crawford was only going to lose this fight, definitive on, how much Canelo Alvarez was going to get to him. And Canelo was just not able to get to him enough within this fight. It just is what it is. But congratulations to Mr. Terence Bud Crawford once again. He has to be up there debatably as the greatest fighter of all time. He has to be up there with almost any other fighter that I've ever seen. Like I said, the only other fighter that I would probably definitively put above Crawford is a Floyd Mayweather Jr. And even that, to be quite honest with you, is not definitive. Crawford is really up there overall with any fighter, and he definitely has to be, overall within the top 10, fighters of all time in my personal view, or at least the top 10 fighters of the past 70 years. Once again, I don't always talk about older fighters such as Sam Langford or Jack Dempsey or certain guys like that, but even in that situation, you probably would still have to put Terence Bud Crawford, overall within that conversation. So great, great, great performance by that of a Terence Bud Crawford, or at least, definitely good enough to get the victory, which is all he needed. And especially because of the standards with him moving up a couple of weight classes against Canelo, against another all-time great level fighter, congratulations to him. But Canelo Alvarez, once again, he just did not do enough in this fight, in my personal view, overall in order to secure the victory. He needed to, at times, get out of the range a little bit more, throw a little bit more, which I would have not been, surprised. I was not super surprised that Canelo only threw one or two shots at a time, but there was just moments to where he needed to throw a little bit more. And then on top of that, I thought that he was going to be able to get to Crawford a little bit easier, because I thought that he was going to be able to walk him down a little bit more. But from the opening bell, it was obvious that Canelo Alvarez, that he had a problem with that lead hand. So it just is what it is. But congratulations to Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. As for Canelo Alvarez, he's going to have to be on that same level, overall as certain guys like an Oscar De La Hoya and a Miguel Cotto and a Sugar Shane Mosley and certain guys like that. He can never be on the same level as guys like a Sugar Ray Leonard or certain guys like that, or a Alberto Duran or a Terence Bud Crawford or even an Usyk. He cannot be on the same levels as those fighters. He is an all-time great level fighter, but he is someone that now forever his legacy will be different. And although, no, I don't think that Canelo was at his absolute peak here, I don't think that Terence Bud Crawford was at his absolute peak either. Because, of course, he's almost 38 years old. He's someone that, overall obviously has slowed down a little bit. And he's someone that obviously gained a substantial amount of weight in order to compete with Canelo in this fight. Now, that being stated, I was a little bit surprised at how big Crawford actually looked and how well he was actually able to handle the weight. I just thought that he was going to slow down, and he clearly did slow down and tire out a little bit more as well. But, because he did not appear to throw as much within this fight as what he does within other fights. But it was enough for Canelo, because Canelo at times isn't always someone that throws, a lot of shots either. And he just needed to do more. I think that Canelo Alvarez tried his best. I think that he did everything that he could do, but it just wasn't enough to win. And Crawford just has more in his skill set, and that was proven tonight. So great, great congratulations to Mr. Terence Bud Crawford, the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, at least more than likely in all of boxing right now, and probably clearly the best of his era. And if you don't overall rank him as that, then I mean, that's up to you. But in my personal view, now he does have to be remembered as the personal best of his era. To me, there's really not much of a debate about it. The only other fighter, at least as of right now, that maybe could even possibly be debated there is that of an Alexander Usyk. Canelo Alvarez can no longer be debated there. So it just is what it is. But anyways, that being stated, congratulations to Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. That's pretty much all I got to say for now. I also have to stay up for the fight with Inoue and that of an Akhmadaliev, which I believe is going to be streaming on Facebook. But congratulations to Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. Great, great, accomplishment and performance in his career. And he now is going to be remembered with anyone within the history of boxing. So congratulations. But that being stated, thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later, and we'll see what happens next.